Servus, that's hello in Bavarian. It's Matthias, that's German for, well, never mind. I'm here, and this is Single Track. This week, I chat with Dan Probst, race director of the Mount Baker Ultra, easily one of the gnarliest and most ambitious races in the Pacific Northwest. A 50-ish mile trail race that takes you from the town of Concrete, Washington, to the top of Sherman Peak, a sub-summit of Mount Baker, and all the way back down to town. There are river crossings, glacier travel, and a tricky summit traverse. The race is not for the faint of heart, and the race organization to pull this all off is breathtaking and comes with an incredible 100-plus year history. But before we dive into the interview, I want to tell you about a new pair of sunglasses I'm sporting on those very few sunny days we have here in the Pacific Northwest right now. The Swank XL from Tifosi. This year, Tifosi Optics followed up their popular Swank sunglasses with the Swank XL, a pair of sports sunglasses for any outdoor activity with a bit larger lenses and fits for bigger heads like mine. The glasses feature non-slip grip frames and 100% UV-protected polycarbonate lenses that are scratch resistant. A great looking pair of sunglasses at a great price, the Tifosi Swank XL. Visit TIFOSI optics.com to learn more. That's TifosiOptics.com. And of course, I want to tell you one more time about my virtual race coming up next month, the Virtual Vert Winter Challenge. The race with the unique formula where miles, vert, and reps on your local hill are calculated together to give you a final score. So if you run up Courthouse Hill or the Manitou Incline, the reps, the amount of times you climb that hill, count big in this virtual challenge. Visit rockcandyrunning.com to learn more and sign up. And now, here's Dan. Daniel Probst on Single Track. You are calling me, even though you originally or currently live in Bellingham, you're not calling me from Bellingham. Where are you at right now?
No, I'm in Payson, Arizona.
Nice. So it's nice and warm down there?
It's a little bit above freezing. It is kind of in the mountains here, but it is sunny. It is sunny out, which is the reason I'm down here.
Nice. So you're another Bellingham person. My goal is to interview every single person in Bellingham who lives in Bellingham on the podcast. No, I'm kidding. I'm glad you're here, and we should introduce you a little bit, and you should do that because I don't really know too much about you other than the big project that you're working on, which we'll be talking about later. But first, tell our listeners a little bit who you are and what you do.
Yeah, my name is Daniel Probst, and I am the race director for the Mount Baker Ultra, which is a 56-mile running and mountaineering race that goes to 10,160 feet on Mount Baker and back. And I've been running ultras for 17 years or so, and started this race back in 2017.
So you led with sort of your job title, which is you're the race director, and that's really what we want to talk about it. But I did glean from your ultra sign up that you ran Tor De Geants, and I don't know if I pronounced it correctly, in the Alps. So really, all I want to talk about is that. Tell me about that.
That is normally what I want to talk about as well.
Yeah.
Because that really was, that's what inspired me to put on to be a race director. I've run now about over 100 ultras, and predominantly in the mountains on trails is where I love to be. And then in 2010, that was the very first year of Tor De Geants or Tour of Giants, and I saw an ad for it, and I was like, I have to do this. I can't believe 200-mile loop with 80,000 feet of gain.
It's nuts, right? I mean, especially coming from the US, everybody knows about UTMB and knows about some of the other races, and obviously hardcore ultra runners know about Tor De Geants too, but it is such a massive route and with that also a very unique style of racing that I think sort of opens up some possibility about what ultra racing can be, right?
Yeah, it was, well, and how far you can go. Like, there was nothing like that before. I mean, like Hard Rock, so I ran Hard Rock in 2007, and it has, what, 33,000 feet of gain? Mm-hmm. And so, and I was just destroyed after that, especially coming from sea level. And to just, like, no one had, like, an idea of, like, how long can you sustain that kind of elevation gain and descent for multiple days? And so that was really the challenge too. And I've done other challenges like that as well, like Arctic races and stuff, where it's not about how fast you are, it's how fast you are over a distance of time. Like, can you keep yourself from falling apart?
Yeah. I attempted the Monte Rosa 100K, and I DNF'd after 25 miles because these hills were just so damn steep. These trails, there was absolutely no reprieve. I texted with my friend, who at that time was actually in Chamonix because he had just finished UTMB, and he was trying to coach me through one of the lowest lows that I've ever had. And I come to the edge of town where there was an aid station, and he told me, he's like, dude, I see on the GPS tracker that you've made it to the edge of town. Now you just have to make it to the aid station. I'm like, okay, I can do that. And just the trail through town was so steep. There was no time to sort of get a little bit of flat running or moving in to sort of relax the legs. It was absolutely insane. These trails are so steep over there. It's crazy.
It's absolutely crazy. Like, there is one climb in that race that took 9 hours for one climb.
Well, I mean, of course, if you do something like that, you start thinking about what is possible. And here on the West Coast, when it comes to races, it's interesting because we are so limited by permitting agencies and wilderness acts. And so therefore we kind of our creativity is challenged to figure out what race to come up with. And you didn't pluck something out of the blue with this idea for this Mount Baker Ultra. You actually connected to a long history. And I want to talk about the impetus and the history of this in a little bit later. But first, let's talk about Mount Baker Ultra. Let's give people who don't have an idea a little bit of an overview of what the race is all about, where it starts, terrain, where it leads to, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, so the Mount Baker Ultra, as I said, it's a running mountaineering race. So it starts in the town of Concrete, which I think is about 276 feet of elevation. And it runs out along Lake Shannon and across a dam at Baker Lake. And then you run all the way up to Snowline, which is about 3,300 feet. And from there, you put on all your mountaineering gear. And then from 3,300 feet, you go another about 6 miles up to, depending on the route changes depending on the snow conditions, but then you go to the base of the glacier, and we've actually set 10,000 feet of fixed line across the glacier.
It's crazy. Just the ropes is crazy. For people who want to see that, you have to go to the website, and we'll link it all in the show notes. But there's some really cool pictures of how you actually carry the rope up in those giant spools on sleds. It's amazing. Like, I couldn't even imagine what that looks like. It's fantastic.
Yeah, so that's a few 100 pounds of rope. And the only way we were able to, you could get that rope up there is on snowmobile. And so we partnered with the local snowmobile club, the Glacier Cruisers, who ride up there all the time, and they know the mountain. And they were just super excited to help us out, and they've helped us out every year since. So, like, there's, we were very fortunate to be able to have that connection.
So is it the only race that actually goes over a glacier?
So it's not the only race in the world that goes over a
Not in the world, yeah,
glacier,
yeah.
but what makes yeah, so if you count the world, because so this is a very unique race, and I've looked around the world, like so there are a few races, adventure races and stuff that go over a glacier, but none that go up a volcano to
Hmm.
a summit. So,
Yeah.
it's going up the glacier, not just over it.
What's the jurisdiction for that portion of the mountain? Who owns that? Is that National Forest or?
Yeah, so it's in the national forest, and there are multiple agencies, obviously, below the mountain, but all of Mountain Baker is in the national forest. And actually, where our race is in the national recreation area. So there's a specifically designated area for recreation on Baker that's outside of the wilderness. And that's why, if you look on the map, we don't go to the true summit of Baker, which is Grant Peak, because that's in the wilderness, but we go to Sherman Peak, which is outside of the wilderness.
So, you started concrete, a ton of concrete. You race up to the summit, and then you race back down. So, the finish is actually not the summit. The finish is actually back down at concrete.
Correct. Yeah, there's, as I like to remind everyone, you cannot drop halfway through the race because you will be at 10,000 feet.
Yes, very, very true. No, nobody's gonna pick you up from there. Once you're going up, you have to come back down.
You have to come back down. Yes.
Oh, that's funny. Okay, so that clearly, from a race director point of view, has a million challenges. But from a runner too, the amount of gear, the amount of experience required to attempt something like that, definitely goes beyond your average. I want a hard ultra.
Yeah, actually, and so we get interesting comments because some people, they want to run. Like, I'm like, I'm not going to do an ultra unless I run. It's like, well, you don't understand. This is like a mountain. Like, you will not be running up a 30-degree slope. Um, and and of course you have to be on the fixed line. So basically, it's like in the Alps, the Via Ferrata, and so you have a harness on and a lanyard to fix to the main line, and then you clip through the pickets on your way up and way down. And the way we did that instead of doing teams, or the reason we did that instead of doing teams, is that way it's an individual push. You can go as fast or as slow as you want. You're not, being drugged by a teammate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's also for navigation too, because like that's the biggest thing up there is the weather can just turn, and it turned last year where we had to cancel the race because it was just complete whiteout conditions.
Yeah, no, yeah, I remember, which I guess is something that you sort of have to anticipate and play with as a race director and as a racer signing up for something like this, because you're just in mountain terrain, and well, there's just a point where things can't go. Even UTMB, with all the drones and all the helicopters, has to sometimes alter the route or call the race off. You are in the mountains, so it's understood. But what you're doing obviously is next level. It's a volcano. It's on the West Coast. Well, the weather is just so unpredictable up here. But if you get great days, it's beautiful.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So it's, if you look back through our photos, like it's, the first year was shirt and t-shirt, or t-shirt and shorts on the summit. So
amazing. So who do you allow in? I know that you say that, I read on the instruction that it says you need to sort of send a resume in, if you will, an application letter. Tell me a little bit about who you're looking for to run this thing.
yeah, so we do screen, and so it's been great because we get a mix of people that have done a ton, multiple difficult hundreds, that have never been in the mountains or on a glacier, and then we also get mountaineers who've been on a glacier and maybe have only run a marathon or two, and so we look for a combination of have you been in situations where you needed to make decisions for yourself to and you do know your body. Do you know, because like I said, there is no dropping once you hit the snow. You have to get yourself off the snow. We can't come and rescue you, unless it's an absolute emergency. And so it's basically overall fitness and then, what experience do you have? And then we, try to weigh how many people of, different skill levels we let in.
One of the most unique concepts for a race that, as we already hinted, comes with a big history. But before we go into history, let's talk a little bit about the challenges. You only have a limited amount of runners. You almost have more volunteers than runners, given the amount of people that it requires to fix the ropes and safety and everything. It's a huge project organizationally. Did you know that when you had this idea? Was that something that was like, oh, we need this too, and oh my gosh, we need this too? Or were you like, okay, this is like an expedition race?
Oh no, no, putting on the race is like, I knew it was going to be hard, and it is always hard. And no matter how many times we're like, oh, well, we'll make it easier by doing this, something else pops up that makes it hard. And like, the snow melts out, and then we can't get snowmobiles across the creek, and we have to find a different way up. Or the snow melts off, and like last year, even though we didn't have a race, the rope was on the mountain, but the snow melted off so quick we couldn't get the rope off of snowmobiles. So I ended up myself and friends ended up packing it down from 8,500 feet down to the trailhead on our backs.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, it is, I like to call it also the race before the race, because it's not like we can set the rope a week before the race, because it starts melting sometimes a foot or two a day up there. And so we actually start setting the rope on Friday before the race, and then with a small crew, they set the summit, and then on Saturday the rest of the crew sets all the rope down to the bottom of the glacier, and they only have till Saturday at midnight to finish that, because then the race starts. So there's only maybe an 8-hour gap.
And that challenge explains, because the idea that I had when I was thinking about you canceling last year was, is there a way that you could potentially immediately set a fallback date where you're saying, okay, it's either happens this weekend, or if the weather is shit that weekend, immediately happens the next weekend. But if the rope's already on the glacier and then the weather comes in, then having a fixed date to postpone it to the following week doesn't really help you, right?
Yeah, no. We had thought about that, but the big thing is the amount of logistics in volunteers. So like, you move it a week or two, you lose all those volunteers that had planned to take 2 or 3 days off and travel, and then you lose all the racers that also were planning to travel. And then you have to rework permits, because your permits and insurance are only for a certain window. So it makes it really complicated to try to move it. And when we talk about the history, that was, the storms and everything were an issue back then as well. So it was nothing new to me, but it's always a challenge.
It is. Is it worth it? You've had 1 year canceled with COVID, last year canceled with weather. Does it feel overwhelming, or is it still worth it?
No, it is still worth it.
I know that's perhaps an unfair question, but it's such a big project, and you're not doing it for yourself, right? You're doing it for others. So there is sort of this external commitment where, if you would say, dude, this is so massive, I would totally understand.
Yeah. So, we had 3 successful years of the race, but we never really broke even on those 3 years.
Exactly.
I'm
looking at the logistics, and I'm like, this is insane, and it's amazing. And what the problem that you have, and I don't know, that's a little bit of a West Coast problem, is that I talked with race directors in Europe, and they're basically saying, well, if you come with a race idea to a town that knows that tourism brings them, it keeps them alive, they will basically say, oh, you're bringing us a race idea. How much money do you need to make this happen? Like, and in here, it's like, oh, you want to put on a race? Well, this permit's going to cost you this much. This permit's going to cost you this much. Like, you are paying to put this on versus the other way around. So,
yeah. Well, and to go back to Tor De Geants, so they got $500,000 to put on the race the first year from tourism. So basically, our entries were like nothing compared to, and it took them 3 years. And after 3 years, they got to a lottery, and now it's like I went back in 2012, but I haven't been able to get through a lottery since.
That makes me cry. $500,000. That's amazing. I'm talking here to my tourism bureaus, and they're like, well, yeah, you can have some tourism dollars, but only if you stand on one leg and you're whatever. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, here it's so different because here you actually have to have already proved what you're doing before you can get a grant.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh man. Okay, so and then. Okay, let's make this a little bit bigger because the original race started in Bellingham and was 100 miles, and you were working on a route and it seemed impossible, and now you're doing sort of half the distance. Is this a compromise you're okay with living, or is it temporary for you?
It's permanent for now. Because our other challenge on the other route was actually trying to go through 2 miles of wilderness, which on a trail that was actually part of the very original race. And there are restrictions to having races through wilderness. There are workarounds for those, but it requires getting a vote from Congress. So,
okay, well,
see how far that's going to go.
Yeah, somebody will filibuster it. You'll have no chance.
Yeah, and actually, so it worked out that concrete totally welcomed us, and the Forest Service said that we could go up through that route if we went through concrete. And it turned out, actually, in the original race, the Mount Baker Marathon, there were actually 3 routes, and 2 of the routes started in Bellingham, and another route started in concrete, but only one runner ever ran from the concrete route.
Okay. All right, so you are standing on the shoulders of giants. This is an idea that came up by some crazy people in the early 1900s. I've just done a little bit of research before we recorded to try to put this in perspective. This is the West Coast. Essentially, the West Coast hadn't even been settled by white people for 100 years prior. I mean, there was so little over here. Mountaineering had started in Europe at that time. Most of the big glaciers at that point had been climbed, but to have a race, so not going out for exploration and planting the flag and looking for resources, but actually having a sporting event, if you will, in 1908 is insane, right? I mean, this is pretty crazy.
It was. And so, so the first race was in 1911, and the race lasted for 3 years, from 1911 to 1913. And actually, there's a really great documentary that was made called The Mountain Runners. So if anybody's listening and wants to check out more history on the original, you can watch the Mountain Runners documentary that explains the first 3 years. But yeah, nothing else had been done like it. And they advertised the race all over the country, and they wanted the race to be a worldwide success.
That's amazing.
Even back in 1911, in 1911, they they thought that after a couple of years of the race, that they would get European runners to come to Bellingham to race, which is just like to think of traveling weeks to go to a race.
Yeah, and to even like, you were saying they were advertising this nationwide and then globally. I mean, there were no Facebook ads back then, right? How do you even advertise something like that? I mean, the vision or I don't know, craziness. I mean, that's amazing.
Well, they were so. And originally, the kind of the difference between back then and today is back then they were doing it was, I mean, very same, like 100% tourism. So basically, like, Tor De Geants, it's kind of that same idea. Of course, our take on it is not necessarily for tourism per se, but to give athletes just this incredible experience that there isn't. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't put on a race if I didn't want to do it myself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you don't sell the tourism angle to the racers. You sell them the adventure. You sell the tourism angle to the city council.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so but that original race, it was sold to the tourists. So there were thousands of tourists that come to watch just a handful of runners.
That's amazing.
And in fact, they actually strung a phone line to the top of Mount Baker so that they could call back and tell when the first runner reached the summit.
Damn, that is absolutely amazing. I mean, the vision, the foresight, I mean, it's a bummer that it only happened for 3 years. And thousands of tourists? I mean, that's like more than Western States gets now.
Yeah, it's exactly. So it basically, as far as tourists coming to town, it is like UTMB or Tor De Geants, where thousands of people come to watch. And they brought in the Barnum and Bailey Circus. They had all kinds of festivities for the whole week. Like it's really hard to believe what they had back.
That is so, but I mean, even the fact that they were able to grow this in such a short period of time, because it happened only for 3 years?
Yeah. So they had just as many they had more problems than we did. So like the first year, the fastest guy up and down the mountain, Harvey Haggard, he got in a train wreck when the train hit a bull on the way back and derailed the train. and so I guess I should back up a little. So the original race, you would either take a car or a train or a horse to get to the mountain, and then you would run roughly 30 miles from the trailhead to the summit and back, and then get in whatever vehicle you came in and race back to town. And so it had, many more difficult stages than we do today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's funny that somebody would pick a train. It's like coming to the station, I'm like, train is 25 minutes late. Great. Yeah, or the train hits a pole.
It was that, or you're riding in the very first Model T down a dirt road.
It's true, right? Yeah. Exactly. It's like, what are your vehicle options, right? I mean, perhaps you could have taken a bike, but that's fantastic.
They actually tested motorcycles to get to the trailhead.
Oh yeah, I guess.
Yeah, it was like any means possible to the fastest way you could get to the trailhead. And but like one of the stories is one of the guys took the Model T and he was so car sick by the time he got to the trail, he was just like, I'm done. I'm not even going to try to climb the mountain.
Oh my gosh. These people were something else back then. I feel really soft.
Yeah, they were, what I don't think people understand is how, these were like all woodsmen and also professional athletes, professional runners and boxers. And they, like the times, there are recorded times. And so, and if you look back at those times, they're like Killian times. Like they I think it's roughly about 9 hours, a little over 9 hours for the entire trip. The car trip, to the mountain is like an hour, and then same back. But no course markings, just up the trail, up the glacier. It was crazy.
No course markings, no lycra clothing, and whatever modern amenities that we consider now to be essential and necessary to go out on our runs. That's incredible. So this story existed. How did you hear about it? Like, I mean, since it's not been ongoing, since it's only happened for 3 years, this stuff is buried, right?
Yeah, and actually a lot of this, I've been doing a lot of research to dig up even more history about it, and how it started and who all the people were involved with it. How I got involved is, I grew up in Bellingham or Whatcom County, and in the 70s there was a race started called the Ski to Sea, and it was a relay race. With the bike and ski and kayak and run, but just short legs, and it starts at the ski area, and it was based after this original race, but that race only started in the 70s, and so that kind of I had known about that there was an older race from the 1900s. And it wasn't until I started digging into it that I realized, it's oh my gosh, this was an ultra. This is a trail race. This is exactly what I'd love to do.
No, exactly. Perhaps if you would have asked me, I probably would have said that perhaps in 1900 they would have done somewhat of a multi-sport event too, right? But that's amazing. So you learn about it, and then, digging into the history is one thing, but then you're connecting it to a possibility for a race that could happen in today's time. Tell us a little bit about the process of, you already mentioned that trying to find a route from Bellingham was impossible, so you went the concrete route, but tell us a little bit about that process of how putting the pieces together to make this actually a real thing.
Yeah, and so like I said, the Tor De Geants was my inspiration, because I was just and I couldn't believe what they were able to pull off. Anything that I was about to do was going to be much simpler, even if it included going up a glacier. And so it was just a matter of working through kind of the process of where can we get permits, and and honestly, I spent 3 or 4 years trying to get the route from Bellingham, and also realizing that because that would have been 100 miles, and everybody it's I want to be able to offer a buckle for the finish, and it's if it's shorter, if it's only 56 miles, they can't offer a belt buckle.
No, it's true. Over here in the US, a race has to be 100 miles in order to be really recognized, right? I think in Europe they do routes, and if it's 70K or 120K, then that's what it is, right? But over here, people in general try to get to the 100-mile mark.
Yeah, and I was hoping that people would see that. Exactly. In Europe, you just go from town to town. It doesn't matter what the distance is. And so for this race, that was the most important thing. It's I'm not going to add miles, just add miles. It's hard enough as it is.
I'm curious if UTMB would have gotten so big if they didn't have that sheer dumb luck that Tour de Monte Rosa ended up being just about 100 miles.
Yeah.
If it would have been 140K, it would have just not been 100 miles.
Well, and if you look at TDG now, it has, and many of the races over there, UTMB too, they all have multiple distances.
Yeah, exactly. No, for sure. All right, so concrete it was. You got your start finish. How many different jurisdictions you going through? How many
So
permits you need?
I think it's about 6 different permits. And
Yeah, for that distance, that's pretty crazy.
it is it was a challenge. We looked at other routes, and like it always came down to just like a mile or two we couldn't get a permit for. Just like it's like, oh my gosh, like if people realize, it's just a handful of people running down a road or down a trail, it's not that big of a deal. But yeah, it's always a challenge.
Yeah, no, it is, especially on ultras, right? I mean, people spread out so much that, and wilderness says not more than 12 people, but you're not in a group of 12 ever on an ultra, especially in the later parts of the race, right? Everything spreads out so much.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, the town of Concrete has worked out just great. Like the mayor is totally supportive, and everybody in town is. And it is kind of like every other, big ultra out there that starts in a small town.
That's amazing. And that's really unique for the West Coast, right? In general, races start at some godforsaken trailhead. They don't start in town, and they don't finish in town. That allows you to build that kind of finish line community. Do you have like a Conquest of Paradise playing or something like that at the starting line? That's the song that starts off at UTMB.
Well, we're trying to get there. In fact, we will. This year we've been trying. We've started it like at the outskirts of town, but this year we moved in, so another like 200 yards, and now we're going to start on Main Street. On Main Street in downtown, cool. in front of the Concrete Theater, and as we grow, we hope to grow that party around it.
Well, and you have a difficult starting time, so it's hard to get hundreds of people out. But it's important. We shouldn't just talk about it from a tourism angle. There is the aspect of you have to set the starting time in order to optimize when people reach the glacier.
Yeah, exactly. So the start is at midnight. So Saturday night, midnight, or Sunday morning, 12 a.m. And the reason for that is it takes about 4 hours to get to the edge of the snow, to get the snow line about 22 miles up the road. And you want to climb the glacier climb in the snow when it's as cold as possible. And of course, since it's June, really need to get there as soon as possible. And so that helps because the snow is then hard and firm for the climb.
We talked about it from a tourism angle, and we talked about it from from a lighthearted angle, if you will. That is really the core and the bulk of this race, and we need to bring it back to this mountaineering aspect. You are traveling on a glacier. You are summiting a mountain. There's an aspect to it where things get serious fairly quickly.
Yeah, very much. And if you look through the photos, you'll notice there's our ropes go over snow bridges that have several 100-foot crevasses underneath of them. And so having those snow bridges intact is very important.
You're telling me all of this in a recorded podcast. What does the insurance agency say about that?
We have insurance, marathon insurance. It's for running.
Okay, good.
That's all we're talking about.
I just know that there are 3 types of alternations that I'm aware of. There is, you could get a normal race insurance, and then you can get race insurance, and then they ask you always if it's an obstacle course, right? If there is like water features or something like that. Like that's a different category, and you pay a whole lot more for that. And then the other aspect is if you have alcohol at the finish line. Those are the 3 categories. I don't know if there's a snow bridge category.
No, basically, as long as it doesn't say it excludes this, then we're all good. But
Fantastic. Okay. Well, I mean, the fact that you put ropes up is amazing because it does give people a sense of safety up on the mountain, because so much of mountaineering safety comes from knowing the route. You need to know the skills, but knowing the route gives you the confidence that you don't have to make decisions. Do I need to go left or right around that feature, right?
Exactly. And so that's why, and we have skilled volunteers that go up, 2 weeks before to cache the rope, and then, a couple of days before to set the route, and, check out for avalanche conditions and where the crevasses are, and do our best. At the end of the day, it is still a mountain race and anything can happen. But we do our best to figure out, what our concerns are, so that all the volunteers can know and the runners know. And we have 3 aid stations on the mountain, on the glacier, during the race, at different points, to look out for all the runners.
Shout out to all the volunteers who are willing to make this happen. Volunteering at races can be very easy, that you stand at before starting line and you just help people to park their cars, but it can also mean spending 2 days of setting rope on a glacier.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've had a few volunteers, one of our volunteers, Will, he spent, all 3 days up there. And and some of them make multiple trips. So a lot of the volunteers that go up prior are all on skis. So they have to not only set the rope, but they have to ski up a 10,000-foot mountain and then start setting the rope. So it's a phenomenal effort on everyone's part.
That's amazing. The only other race that I know, that I've run, that is actually a sort of summit out and back race, is the Beast of Big Creek at Mount Eleanor. And obviously it's a completely different beast. It's a half marathon. It's 5,000 feet of vert, but it does feel amazing making it to a real summit and then being able to turn around, considering that your halfway point and then coming back down. It must feel amazing for the racers to be able to have such a great route set for them and then make it to the summit and then turn it. They might not like it going from glacier then back to trails and back to the road, but that part, getting it to the summit, is amazing.
Yeah, and I don't think, you'd have to go look at the photos, but the summit is, so there's a summit ridge that you go out, and depending on how much snow there is on it, sometimes it can be just a knife edge ridge that falls away on both sides. And then you get out to the summit, and there may be only a foot of, we need snow on the summit to be able to set the anchors. But a lot of time we're bumping up against that season where it's starting to melt out. And sometimes there's only been a foot of snow on the summit, and underneath of that snow is just crumbly rock. And the size of the summit is basically like standing on an aid station table. And then all 3 sides, it just completely falls away.
Wow. I think that really explains it well without looking at pictures, because especially with glaciered mountains, we sometimes don't think about it actually being a real mountaineering aspect with the steep drop-offs. We sort of expect snow travel, but we don't really expect that. That's amazing. Do you have people check in? Do you have actually people at the summit waiting for every runner, or do they just punch a card saying they were up there?
Yeah, so we have volunteers on the summit. The last aid station is a couple hundred yards below, and then we have volunteers on the ridge to make sure everyone can manage the ropes. This year we're hoping to put in, where before we had just one rope going out to the summit, we're hoping to do a little bit of a loop so that people can pass side by side without having to cross ropes, that they'll be on their own fixed line. So that'll depend on
Okay.
how much snow there is up there.
That's amazing. Logistically, it's absolutely beautiful to be able to set something like this up and to give people a chance to experience that is so unique and special. Yeah, I'm fascinated. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, it's been amazing to look back in what we accomplished those first 3 years. And yeah, like you said, like, is it still worth it? And it's like, well, yeah, like I still want to be able to offer that experience to people. It just means a lot of work on my end.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it is such a unique experience too, because many ultras that are hard, they are partially hard because of the self-sufficiency that a runner needs to bring to the table. And what you're creating is less the need for self-sufficiency, meaning 15 to 20 miles with very few trail markers and no aid station in between. You have the rope and you have people on the glacier, and you're thinking about things like, how can you create a loop that people can pass easily as they make the way to the summit? They need proficiency. They need experience to be able to successfully snow travel and take care of themselves if things don't go their way. But you are actually setting out the route, which I think is really unique.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's the best format that I could think of that that could make it as safe as possible and straightforward as possible. And also, I didn't want to make this just for the professional mountaineer, like that you need decades of experience. I wanted to make, because I knew, coming from a long distance ultra background, that like if you have the physical capability, then all you need is to have someone, to have a route in front of you and to have a few people on the way to make sure you don't do something stupid.
Now, this year, you are sold out. You have a limited number of racers that you're allowing in each year. There's a wait list. And for people who want to check out, we will put all the links in the show notes so people can easily click and find all the info. Is that number based on permits, or is it number based on what you think is capable, what you can manage on that route? Do you think of growing this? Where do you see this going?
Yeah, so we do our cap this year is 75, and that is self-imposed. So basically that, it's basically double what we've run before. And it is self-imposed based on the fact that, everyone has to be on that fixed line, and the summit area only has so much room. And so we kind of have to see how this year goes. We've also, seen in the past where, like, if it's a sunny day, everyone takes their time and is spread out. Where if it's a storm, like we had a storm the second year in 2018, like right within that time that people got to the summit and everyone grouped up. And so, that causes an issue. So like trying to weigh the different, risk aspects, we wanted to grow slowly, but honestly, I don't think that we will ever, grow much more than this, because I want it to, unlike UTMB that has thousands of people, I want this to be a good experience for everyone. That's amazing. You've run this route a couple times. What are your favorite sections? My favorite sections. Well, I mean, obviously the glacier is absolutely amazing, but we also have, to make this work, we have to put up a cable bridge over the river, and so there's like a scramble down to a river bank, and then you have to go across this little narrow cable bridge that we set up just for the race. And so that's another one of my favorite parts about putting this race on.
That is amazing. I like cable bridges like that. Fantastic. Mount Baker Ultra in Concrete. This is Western Washington. This is a very, very unique race that people need to check out. Did I miss anything? Is there anything else about this race that we haven't covered yet?
Well, we're still looking for volunteers. So.
Okay, no, absolutely. I mean, what a unique place to volunteer. Give us the snow travel, the glacier travel. Runners spread out so much during that time. How many hours have people to be on the glacier? Volunteers.
So the volunteers, they go up. The volunteers set the rope on Saturday. They set the majority of the rope on Saturday. They actually then camp on the mountain, because the first runner is going to be up there at 4 a.m. in the mountains. So they've got to already be up there. So we have between 18 to 20 volunteers between the different aid stations just on the mountain. And so, not only do they have to watch out, set the rope, look over all the runners, then they have to tear the rope down after. And it is so that is probably just as hard or harder than running the race. And in fact, to manage all that, so that's another thing. So we actually have 2 race directors. So I'm the race director. Overall, it's my crazy idea, but I can't be on the mountain, making sure all this goes down well too. So that was a crucial role. And so we have a mountain director who oversees the mountain, and that has been Richard Kresser. And then we have another friend, Sean, that's coming down from Canada to help out as well. So that's just hugely the logistics are for me to figure out. And everyone else can just follow the markers and the rope and have a good time.
It's fantastic. No, absolutely. Follow the markers and have a good time. I like it. And then this was incredible. This was such a good perspective into a race like that. That is so unique, that has a huge history that you're connecting to, that positions itself as something incredibly challenging, yet you make it so accessible. I hope that this year the weather will play along, so you get some awesome sunrise pictures up on the glacier again. Fantastic.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. This has just been, there's nothing else I'd like to talk about more than what we've been able to make happen and hope to see for years to come.
Absolutely. So the website is, you have it on top of your head. It's mtbakerultra.com, correct?
Yep. Just like Mount Baker Ultra.
Okay. Perfect. So Mount Baker Ultra, mtbakerultra.com is the website that gives you the history and some gorgeous photography, so you absolutely want to run it, and info on how to register and how to contact you if you want to volunteer for the race. And there you probably also have links to social media and stuff to stay up to date on what's happening. Yeah,
and this year actually we hope to cast live from the mountain.
Yes,
so everyone, love if you're not running, check our Facebook and Instagram, and hopefully we'll have some pictures and videos from the mountain.
Yeah, fantastic. Dan, thank you so much for coming on Single Track. This was an absolute fascinating and fantastic view into the life of a race director with an absolute crazy idea for such a unique race. Thank you.